Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. And we'll try to get to as many as we can before the end of today's webinar. Also, at the end of today's webinar, are doing a drawing for 6 $25 Amazon gift cards, so please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 6 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is prepare your DevOps culture to withstand the digital experience onslaught. Our speakers today are Justin Donahue, who is CTO of a company called Obsessing, and Marco Coulter, who is tech evangelist at AppDynamics. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me today.
And
Marco,
thanks very much for having us.
Yeah, you're the man. So I am going to go ahead and put myself on mute and let you get right to your presentation.
Thanks so much. So today, as we mentioned, we're going to be talking about the digital experience and how we have to focus on enhancing that as we go through DevOps. First slide here is just our standard sort of legal notice slide. With that's done, what I'd like to do to begin, this is going to be interactive. We're going to push out polls, about 4 polls during the whole presentation. So let's push out the first one right now. And we'll just ask you about which of these 4 quotes matches you best.
Yeah, so we've got 4 up on the screen there. So please go ahead and choose the one that you want. Sorry, Marco, I didn't mean to step over you there. Yeah, so go ahead and make your choose your response, and we'll give you guys about 15 more seconds to go ahead and do that. And while we are waiting for everybody, just want to remind folks that, as I said earlier, if you have a question at any time during the webinar, you can always just use the GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. You don't have to wait till the question and answer period to do that. All right, with that, I think we are at a good point to close out the poll. So let's take a look at the results real quick.
So this is a
majority of folks.
Yep. As we look at these here, we see
that.
Yeah,
so it looks like most. Go ahead.
Yep.
Go ahead.
We have 59% who are like a plurality and a majority who see themselves in the proactively learn from past events phase, which is essentially the phase where something happens, you fix it, and then perhaps you have a post-mortem, hopefully a blameless post-mortem, where you work out what it was. Now, this matches pretty much. Can we take the poll back now? Return to the PowerPoint. So this matches what we saw in research that we did in December of 2019. Cisco polled about 2,000 companies, and as you see there, again, that proactive category was the largest category in the respondents for today. But what was interesting was we also asked them where they wanted to be in 2 years' time. And you see this, the plurality here is moving to the right, in a sense, is moving to this preemptive category. And that's around automation, it's around making tasks happen sort of automatically. So that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we get to that phase of being preemptive? Well, it's all about AI ops. So the session today is going to run, I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes. Justin's going to join me and talk for about 20 minutes. And then we're allowing some time at the end for Q&A to take your questions. So as mentioned, please put them into the question section. And we're sort of going to, at first, because we're going through a lot in the world right now, I thought we'd start with sort of some emotional aspects of this. We need, of the things that we as experts in the industry need to understand, the things we need to accept and embrace. And we're going to talk a little bit about automation and monitoring. And then Justin is going to talk about why partnering with people, that you're not alone, you can get people to help you do this, and partnering with Obsessing is the right thing to do. And then he's going to talk about, because very hands-on in this space, is talking about sort of before and after DevOps and some of the real-world experiences that he's had. And then in the Q&A, we can start getting into some of the war stories and things like that. Just like to introduce ourselves. So first off, I'm Marco. I'm an immigrant who has lived in 3 countries. In my career, I've worked for one of the top 50 international banks. I've managed data centers for hospitals as part of DXC and managed teams in 13 different countries. Before joining AppDynamics, I spent about 5 years as an industry analyst and managed the data science team at 451 Research, creating the voice of the enterprise product for them. I've seen technology from every side as a vendor, an operator, a developer, an analyst, a buyer, and that gives me a bit of a unique view in our industry. So on the left here, you see a few of the publications where you can read my writing or interviews. So enough about me. Let's meet my fellow speaker. Justin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, Marco. Thanks for letting me present with you guys today, and thanks again, DevOps.com, for hosting us. My name is Justin Donahoe. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Obsessing. Before that, I was the head of tech at a startup called Ghostry. We had about 40 million users, a privacy browser plugin. We were kind of at the forefront of digital experience. I joke with people that I was, basically born with a keyboard in my hand. So when the zombie apocalypse comes, if getting the internet back online is how we save humanity, I can help you out. Otherwise, I'm going to be out in the first wave. I've grown up in the startup scene. I've had a lot of successful exits. Software companies. I've been everything from help desk, production support, been on dev teams, software architect, DBA, leader. Since starting Obsessing, you can add cells to that list. Now I spend most of my time focusing on helping customers kind of build out robust software delivery practices and doing engineering at scale. Do a lot of safe, repeatable releases is kind of my main mantra. I think today, we've got a pretty solid topic. I'll get into more how we partner with companies like AppDynamics to make all of the stuff I'm talking about possible. I've got a fair amount of experience in this space. So Marco, where do you want to get started?
So at first, I'm going to take them through the emotional journey a little bit here, Justin. And let's start with understand. We have to understand that we will be judged. Everyone compares the app in their hand with the best apps that Google and Apple or Netflix have to offer. And it's not just software vendors who see this. Even car manufacturers are realizing their apps have to compete with the FANG and get data to users quickly. The number of consumers claiming that they are now more loyal to an app than a brand has doubled over the last 2 years. In fact, this digital experience is so important that 49% have switched suppliers due to a poor digital experience. And by the way, I'll put a link in, we'll share the resource at the end of this research, which was run just a little bit earlier this year. 63% will actively try to discourage others from using a service or brand if they have a bad digital experience. So what's the key aspect of an application that can frustrate users? Well, intriguingly, it's performance, not availability. That comes second. Now, when I first saw this data, I was confused. How can slow performance be more frustrating than not having any performance at all? And then I thought about how much of the user's time is consumed by each behavior. When an app is down, you know straight away, and you move on to other tasks. You only lose a few seconds of your life. But when you're dealing with a slow app, it saps away your life at every step. Say you're depositing a check, if anybody still does that. You're going to wait for the app to open, and then you're going to wait some more time to log in. And then there's more time while you go through and select the deposit transaction that you want. And then you're waiting for the camera to come up so you can take a photo of a check. And then finally for the response to come back from the bank or financial institution that that check was recognized and accepted. Each of those moments is sapping away a little piece of your life. And I think that's why you see here that performance is the key frustration that people have with digital services. So what about how they're judging us? Well, consumers choose retailers according to how quickly they can understand a product how quickly they can get access to a product or service without visiting a store. 63% say that. And they pick even their bank based on the ability to perform all transactions digitally, such as depositing a check. Now, interestingly, over the next 3 years, 85% of consumers expect to select brands based on the variety of digital services they provide. So whether they can get to that brand through web and mobile and connected devices and IoT and so on. So the digital experience is a key criteria in choosing a vendor, and that is impacting the nature of technology. So the study that I'm going to send you later on, it was published in May 2020, just a few weeks ago. And the research was taken during the middle of the pandemic. So we're able to ask people questions about how that was changing their attitudes. 88% state that the digital customer experience is now the priority. So this is asking technologists now, right? Their world has changed, our world has changed. However, we are facing challenges in delivering seamless customer experiences, especially, with the pandemic bringing spikes in website traffic and things like that. So 80% were challenged in delivery because they lacked a unified visibility and insight into the performance of the technology stack and correlating that to its impact on customers. So today, Justin and I will talk about how we can help in this space. So first, a bit like a Zen master, I'm going to take you through these emotional stages so you understand that you will be judged, but first you have to accept something. You're going to have to accept that you need automation. You cannot do it all yourself. You cannot code or script your way out of this by yourself. There is just too much. It's not possible. There are too many containers and VMs and microservices and legacy systems. It's not humanly possible to cope with all of this manually. Artificial intelligence and machine learning can help, and that's why I want to talk about AI Ops. So if we start with a quick definition, what is AI Ops? If I say AI Ops is about applying AI and ML to operations, that doesn't really help you much. So I like to think of it this way. It's the next generation of monitoring. It brings automation, performance, and service management under one holistic approach. Now you can read a sort of more technical definition here, but the key of AI Ops is what it will take off the plate of DevOps engineers. So at this time, I want to ask you another quick poll question. For the folks out there, can we push out the next poll, please? So it's a pretty simple yes/no question. Have you manually set health rules or thresholds for a performance monitor? You should see the yes/no answer in front of you there. Great, I'm seeing some responses come in. I'm just going to pause for a few seconds while we let some more people swap screens and click on the response. And as soon as we get to a majority, we'll come back to start showing some of the results. Okay, that's fantastic. Let's just share the results. It was interesting how these numbers changed on the way through, but where we ended up, we have about 60% of people who are saying, yeah, they've had this experience. So thank you. Can we close out the poll now? So for the 40% who haven't, I will share something with you. I've done this. And this, setting these thresholds and for performance monitoring is a living hell. You have to work out which metrics to focus on and what do you set the threshold to. What if it's a brand new application that you've never seen run before? Then what is normal? With AI Ops, you don't have to worry about this. You can let the machine learning do it for you. So how do we do that? Well, there are two ways that AppDynamics AI Ops identify normal. The first is historical, right? It's somewhat the easiest way. So at 9 a.m., a login storm is normal. Everyone's getting to work, but the same thing happening at 3 p.m. on Wednesday, well, that's an anomaly. It could be a network outage and everyone's having to reconnect in, or maybe it's a denial of service attack coming from the side somewhere. So historical is just looking at prior experience and working out, yeah, this is normal at this time of day, at a different time of day it would change. The contextual is the smart one. This looks at the metrics. If you look at the metrics on the right here, lots of metrics often track together or in opposition to each other. And the threshold here is set to watch for those context changes. So, if they're tracking together, the world is good. But if one of those sort of metrics that normally tracks together suddenly doesn't, then you have an anomaly. Now imagine trying to manually set a threshold for that sort of context. When metric 1 peaks and metric 2 spikes, then metric 3 should spike at the same time or else you have an anomaly. That's an extremely complex thing to do and you don't want to have to do it manually. Now, contextual correlation is about watching the metrics around the metric. A simple example here is bandwidth network bandwidth, and transactions per second. When these metrics track together, even if they change from historical norms, the previous few days on the chart here, then from the sort of historical norm, but if they're still tracking together, so you see here that both metrics are going up, then that's okay. Life is good, life is normal, and you shouldn't get an alert storm from it. It just means your load increased. Maybe marketing finally had a great campaign that generated customers coming to your website. But what if that changes? Now we see the contextual misalignment. One moves and the other is flat. Now you have an anomaly. You want an alert for that. You need, you have more transactions coming in, but the network bandwidth usage is not going up. You're choking on the network and you need to assign more bandwidth to this application. As we're looking at metrics in this way, and of course, it would be a mistake to only think about system metrics here. When you load it with business metrics so that the machine learning models can learn the relationships between all of the different numbers and metrics being stored, then when you load it with the business metrics, you can correlate it and detect business anomalies as well. So consider the scenario where everything that supports your application, the servers, the application code, the databases, all of those bits and pieces, they're all under load, but just below the alert thresholds. The system will look green like this, right? Because each individual piece of it is just under the threshold to change color. But consider the customer experience. The cart transaction bounces across each of these components. And instead of the usual median response time for each step, it's getting the maximum response time, but still within the range for each step, but the maximum for each step. All those extra milliseconds add up, and the business transaction, the customer digital experience that they care so much about, is actually so slow that they're abandoning carts. Now, watching the system metrics will not see that. You also need to track and measure the overall business transaction. So here we see that we're looking at the amount of revenue that the transactions are producing, and that is outside the norm. Orders placed has dropped to what it usually is at this time of day. We will change these business metrics to red and highlight them for you so you know you need to take action and respond to this. The question is that once you reach this stage that you're taking action, then what caused this anomaly? You now want to work out where the problem lives. And of course, that's what we call root cause analysis. Now, some don't like that term because there are often multiple causes, but let me get away with using it for now. Think of the steps that go into RCA, root cause analysis. Normally, you're going to start a war room, you get every person and their dog in the war room, you go into log dives, and you're collating metrics. AIOps will give you root cause analysis directly, or even better than that, it will give you a short list. Now you have an insight, the knowledge of where to fix things. And the next step is then, with the short list like these causes here, is you need to take action. So that brings me to the central nervous system. We identified that you weren't going to buy all of your products from us and that we needed a partner program to connect our solution as the central nervous system to your entire environment. So what we sorted out, we start with giving visibility to all these domains on the left here: business, user experience, applications and infrastructure, and of course, network and security. You bring all these together into a centralized core so that the machine learning models can do their thing in this cognition engine to auto baseline and correlate them. You cannot correlate if the data is still in silos. You have to bring it together for the AI to see the patterns for anomaly detection and automated root cause analysis. And that's the insight section here. And then you need to take action. We want to be able to build systems of intelligence and to give you intelligent applications and infrastructure so that they are self-configuring, self-healing, self-optimizing, and so on. So you understand now that you will be judged and you accept that you need automation. For that automation to be effective, you have to embrace a concept. You have to embrace your need for unified monitoring. Yes, this is a need for your enterprise, but it's also a need for your career as well. Research from the DevOps Institute shows experience with monitoring has moved up. Monitoring experience is now considered a must-have skill by 39% of hiring enterprises. Now, some people ask around this stage when I'm in a conversation, yeah, I have a monitor tool here and over there, and isn't that enough? And to answer that, we need to take a quick look at how applications changed in the last decade. As the customer experience simplified, application complexity exploded. We sort of started off with on-premise type gear, and then we moved to on-premise cloud or private cloud. We expanded that and we started running things in the public cloud. Now the challenge here is that each of these things, and by the way, now we're running multi-cloud, each of these things came with its own monitor. So in each environment, you have each different pieces, but you see I put question marks in there of like, how do you bring it all together so you can see it overall? Well, one of the challenges is having to log into each of these monitors, looking for the component in trouble, or something like this. So this is just one of the sample dashboards that we've created, bringing an entire business and technology environment together on one screen. Obviously you're going to put this up on a screen in your ops room or something like that, or your call center, so you can see straight away where you have issues in your environment. This is the ops visibility that I was mentioning. With this sort of unified monitoring, you can now do some pretty cool things like release verification, watching the performance of new versions being rolled out. So you can even do this in staging or test environments to help you identify issues before they hit the user. You can also use this for blue, green, or canary deployments. APM gives you the real numbers to support your go forward or rollback decisions. And Justin will talk about that in a little bit. We have many customers using this for cloud migration as well. When you're migrating to cloud, you're going to run in a hybrid environment. Some services in the cloud, some still on-prem, and some even spanning both for the duration of the migration. Now, if you're a small shop, that's only going to last a couple of weeks. But if you're a large enterprise, that could last months or even over a year. Monitoring will need to be done for the entire IT environment for this duration. And it's likely that you're going to be transactions that span both in that time. You need clear view of that you've improved the environment through your migration to cloud, that you're reducing costs, that you're making things better, and that the business is still actually running better. And look, we know that monitoring is core of everything. About 10 years ago, development and operations teams started transforming into DevOps teams. And when you look at John Kim's DevOps Infinite Ribbon on the left here, monitoring is identified as one of the must-have phases for every release cycle of product. Today, the industry is moving on to site reliability engineering, or SRE. And this pyramid on the right here defines the SRE hierarchy of needs. By the way, AppDynamics has something for every layer of the pyramid, but that's a topic for another talk. Note that monitoring here is the base supporting the rest of the pyramid. So monitoring is critical, and you need to sort of accept that you need unified monitoring. So with that said, let's go back to one more poll question. I want to ask you if you suffer from release anxiety. Again, it's just a simple yes, no answer. Justin, what's your opinion on release anxiety?
So I definitely think this is a great question. Release anxiety is actually something I talk about pretty regularly. One of the things that I try to get people to understand is if releasing is scary and or difficult, it means they're going to avoid it, and it's going to happen less often, which means we're going to start getting bigger releases because we're going to take more and more time between releases. So now, not only do we already hate them, but because we're waiting, we're introducing bigger releases, which means more risk entering into production, which actually makes the releases get worse, which increases release anxiety. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So where we like to focus is helping our customers reduce the friction of software releases. I'll get back into this concept a little bit later because release anxiety is a very real thing. I see it all the time.
So let's just look at the results from the poll.
That's a pretty telling number.
Yeah.
I'm kind of glad, like I'm not glad for you, but I hope my talk will help you maybe with release anxiety. That number is actually higher than I was expecting to see. So before I get too far down the path of my talk, let me just kind of introduce who Observian is, just so you can kind of get an idea what we're about. So we're an advanced AWS partner and a premier Google partner. We started hyper-focused on the cloud, which is still a really big part of what we do. However, you know, as we started developing our engagement models and getting feedback from the market, we realized we were probably focusing a little too much on the destination instead of the journey. So what we really do now is try to meet customers where they're at in this digital experience journey and how they're responding to it, and meet them where they're at and help them build to it and dig their way out of this. The original concept, when I was talking with Jason, when we were trying to figure out, starting Observian, was actually from my previous experience at Ghostery, where we were a digital experience company, and we were on the forefront where we were helping customers analyze the third parties on their websites. And that means we were basically scanning 40+ million web pages a week with these massive clusters in AWS and giving customers their digital experience score. We had different customers where we'd see things like mixed content warnings would increase shopping cart abandonment. Slow performance was the biggest cause of people leaving shopping carts. Stuff like that. You'd have a third-party JavaScript tag that somebody in marketing added for some campaign. They forget to turn it off. Later down the road, we have an outage. Oh yeah, it's because that tag broke. So like when you start integrating all these technologies, it gets really complicated. That's why you need something like AppDynamics to really kind of help you out. So one of the other things that we ended up doing while I was at Ghostery that kind of led to wanting to start a company doing this is we were scanning so much and serving up ads in the ad tech ecosystem to try to help, Digital Advertising Alliance, behavioral advertising, like right to be forgotten. Like we were early in GDPR as well. Well, the internet doesn't turn off. And so our costs were going up and to the right. We got up to almost $500,000 a month in cloud spend. And myself and some others, after some fun fundraising and layoffs, we'll call it, we're able to reduce that number to about $150K a month, which translates to roughly $4 million a year in savings. And that whole experience just kind of sucked, but we learned a lot. And it made me think, I really wish there was more people that could help me. Because like when I spin up AWS for the first time, I just need an email. There's no guided tour. I don't get Clippy that jumps up and is like, hey, let me show you how to do this. It's more like if I click the wrong button, there could be 10 grand out the window. So kind of where we focus is a lot on cost optimization. That's kind of our origin. I personally spend a lot of my time in like the DevOps and container space and a lot of application observability. I help with cloud migrations. But at our core, you'll see that we have the word digital transformation, because digital transformation is pretty much impacting all of us. It doesn't matter what vertical we're in. I'm assuming everybody on this webinar is either in the middle of doing a digital transformation project, they just finished one, or they're thinking about starting one. Like this demand for digital experience excellence from our customers is impacting literally everybody. So if we jump ahead kind of into our approach at Observian and how we help customers solve this problem, there's just a few things I want to call out. This stuff can be really hard, but it doesn't have to be. You're not alone. There's people and tools that can help you out. And without having a solid foundation in your software development practice, it's near impossible to react to the consumer demands of digital experience. And it's also not something that we have to try to build in a day. We can progress our way through it, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more. We at Observian are very much educators as much as we are hands-on doers. So our approach is, we'll do some assessments, plan and execute with you, but we'll also do more of a mentorship. And then some of our customers are more like, no, just do it for me. So we've got different models. But again, we have the infinity ribbon as well. At the end of the day, what we care about is safe and repeatable releases. What we're trying to help our customers do is get their engineers spending more time on business value code and not tooling. Because I really don't think your customers are paying for you to develop monitoring. They're probably paying for something like online banking, right? So jumping into, just some other advantages. I'm not going to sit here and just read this slide to you. I've kind of already touched on it with like our experience. A couple high level points I just want to make with why I think you should consider working with a cloud partner is it gives you access to a group of experts with a widespread exposure to varying use cases. And feel free to use our partner statuses to your benefit. We can unlock partner funding from the major cloud providers to either help you with migrations, POCs, application modernization. Spend a lot of time in that space. I help customers go to Kubernetes or serverless. And sometimes it's even just doing a lift and shift because they got to get out of a data center that's shutting down or whatever. Going into kind of where do we get started on addressing this digital experience problem that's pretty much beating us all in the face. Let me start out with a pyramid, just like Marco had one. This is the concept of your enterprise application stack. And this is where we try to begin engagements with customers, but in varying stages of the journey, we get them in different areas. But at the high level, you need to have a solid enterprise foundation. Think of things like, this is where we're going to set up, IAM permissions if we're in the cloud. We're building out your network backbone. We're doing monitoring, central logging, and automation, and that's the big one. Automation is a key theme that keeps coming up today. Marco kind of dove into how AppDynamics uses automation to get your teams to focus on the problems that matter and keep you out of trying to obsess over metrics that just don't matter or trying to baseline yourself. It's like, let's use ML to do that. So at Observian, we try to help customers build that out on day zero, so their first exposure with the cloud is a little more pleasant than what mine was. From automating your network, we start out with Terraform, and then we'll go all the way to building safe and repeatable pipelines with various tools that I'll get into in a little bit. Moving up the pyramid, if you will, when we start talking tech stack, what we're really talking about is services. So think managed services and platforms. If I'm in Google, it's GKE. If I'm in Amazon, it's EKS. If I'm talking Kubernetes, it's Compute Engine and EC2. If I'm talking VMs, it's really the platforms and tools that you're using to build your applications. Let's just think of them as like the service Legos that we put together to then have a nice foundation for our applications. And then obviously apps is the whole reason we're here today talking about the impact of this. This is why we have jobs, right? This is the whole reason we're doing this. We're hosting to provide services or make money. The areas I'm going to focus on today and for the rest of my talk kind of integrate with the technology stack, and they straddle over the enterprise foundation. Tools like AppDynamics and concepts like CI/CD pipelines. This slide is where I'm going to kind of start with the way Observian approaches this problem. I'm assuming everybody on this call is going to have various levels of experience with DevOps. Let's talk about just what we do, right? So DevOps isn't something that you can just buy. It's a culture and a mindset. And because of that, it means something different to everybody. So I want to introduce you to kind of the concept of a DevOps MVP that I try to help customers build. And it's more of approaching DevOps and this whole problem from a philosophy standpoint, and I don't get into religious battles. So step one, you need Git. I don't care what flavor of Git, but please, for the love of God, be Git. Whether it's GitHub, GitLabs, Bitbucket, I really don't care. I have opinions if I'm asked. You can probably figure it out from the slide. Step two, we need something that does the build process, right? Whether it's a build service or a server, we can work with it. My preference is that we use something that's container-based, so we don't have to maintain a bunch of build servers, and we can actually source control our build process right next to our code. Step three, I really feel like this is something I need to emphasize because you'll see how it kind of comes together later. We need to recognize that CI and CD are not the same thing. They're actually very different. We need to separate these concepts as early as possible. That's going to be a critical step in our path to getting to self-healing architecture. So CI is where we're building code, and CD is where we're shipping code. If we tie these concepts together, it kind of makes it hard to react quickly. I've seen massive Jenkins implementations that require a full rebuild before it can deploy. And imagine if I'm trying to roll back a problem or respond to a scaling issue, I don't really have time for that. So let's start talking about one other thing, which is testing and quality. So CI and CD, right? So in this case, I'm going to call CI the left side and CD meaning the right side. So what do I mean by that? Well, left side testing is things that we can filter out as early as possible through things like unit test, integration test, image scanning, peer reviews. We really want to try to catch as many problems here as possible because it's the least costly and we can correct them the fastest. When we start getting into right side testing, these are things that we validate by running code in the wild, looking at things like user experience, error rate, response times. This is where AppD really shines. The other thing is, we'll call it step 6. We want to have a solid CD tool, something that simplifies releases and rollbacks. I don't want to be in the business of writing all these custom scripts like Marco kind of alluded to earlier. We're going to have systems that are spinning up containers, spinning down containers. Let's just have a tool that just does it like that's what they specialize in. And then lastly, towards the bottom, I want people to understand how powerful Git can be for change control management. This is a framework that we use for more than just releasing software. We use it for things like infrastructure as code. We can do it for serverless pipelines. We can even do it for monolith applications that are going in and out of VMs. But we can also use it for things like Kubernetes objects. Like GitOps is a movement because Git is just that good at doing things. So that's kind of how we approach DevOps. And assuming we're working with DevOps.com, I'm assuming everybody understands the importance of the need for DevOps. But I just want to kind of walk through real quick a story that I think most of us can relate to of why we do all this and why we need DevOps. And it's at the core, it's a movement that started as a way in the early days to respond to the demands of digital experience excellence and this onslaught that we're all being tasked with. So these are some metrics from my own personal story. I'm hoping some of them will resonate with you. So on the left, we were a team that was throwing bodies at shiny objects. And we were just trying to get that next release out, right? So if you want a good visual of what this looks like, imagine you've got a pool of software devs that are tackling problems like little kids playing soccer. Nobody's playing their position. They're just chasing where the ball is. Got to get this release out, got to finish this feature, got to do this break fix. There's a good chance, and you can bet on it, that we had workflows that were waterfall, or we had these massive expectations and we'd go off and we'd start coding them. We didn't have a lot of check-ins. There wasn't, really that agile. It was pretty much pre-DevOps, right? So you'd get a mixed result. Sometimes you'd hit the mark and it was pretty costly, and sometimes you wouldn't. So the whole concept of releasing software quickly so we can get immediate feedback is where I'm going to take this conversation. Our engineering and operations were very siloed, so hearing things like works on my box and just throwing it over the wall was pretty normal. We were doing quarterly releases, which in today's world is just unbelievably slow. Like releasing multiple times a week, a day, an hour isn't unheard of anymore. This is a direct result of the digital experience boom that we're all in the middle of. If you're a team member sitting on one of these teams that likes to throw bodies at shiny objects, you're in a constant state of firefighting. It's super stressful and releases just suck. They get so bad that people hate doing them because of release anxiety, which means we put it off. So when we do a release, our releases get bigger. And the more change, which increases more risk entering production. And it looks kind of like the photo down at the bottom, like nobody knows what's going on. It just sucks. So let's kind of, get out of that mindset. I'm going to just quickly show you, this slide. I have it look old on purpose. This is agile development. It's a proven fact. People have been doing this for years. And everybody knows that we need to implement DevOps, but not everybody understands how or why. But I think they understand the reason driving it, which is this digital experience. So after DevOps comes into your organization, you might get something that looks like this. This is directly from one of my stories, where we start to have roadmaps for each product line. We start to have dedicated co-located teams that are less little kid soccer and more self-sufficient, that they can release on their own. Engineering and operations start to blend together, so they're working on the same team instead of like clear separation. That's where we get actual DevOps. And some of those seams in our organization, depending on size, is figuring out the whole CI/CD process, how much is dev driven, how much is infrastructure driven. We have proven techniques that work in the industry. And one of the things I like to call out is I don't feel like we have one single source of truth that has just kind of made up and say, here's doing it. It's a community collaboration. The Spotify culture video really covers this concept really well if you want to learn more information about that. So the results are, we start releasing more often with consistent results, and releasing is no longer scary. So now we're able to focus and respond to the user experience instead of fighting against ourselves. We start to get into this transformation where digital experience has impacted us so much that we've gone and we've restructured our entire way we do our workflows. We've ripped our organizations apart. We start building these different teams, trying to just keep up with this demand. Well, you thought release anxiety was already bad. when we were deploying single monolithic applications. But being as we've gotten better at releasing, we start to spend more time and energy into building more distributed architectures and teams that allow us to respond even faster. We're moving more and more workloads into the cloud. We're designing workloads that respond to immediate demand instead of being provisioned for peak at all times. So we have workloads in some cases that might only exist for a few minutes. This is creating more and more complexity. But if you remember, our customers have set the expectation that it's got to work always. Like downtime is just not something people accept anymore. Slow websites, people don't really tolerate. The old mindset of chasing shiny features to cut corners has been proven wrong. No one remembers when a product or feature launches. Like think about it without Googling it. What day did Facebook launch, YouTube, or even your own product? I'll kind of let you in on a little secret. Nobody cares. But everybody cares when apps like these go down and they start blowing up Twitter and in some cases start using your service or product altogether. So where do we go from here? Hopefully we go forward with the slide. So we get a tool like AppDynamics to help us out, right? So at Observian, we use AppD to help customers with things like baselining and inventory and cloud migrations. It's, it gives us something to aim for in terms of performance and response time. It helps us find unknown dependencies. Oftentimes when we're in early discovery or even POCs with a customer that don't have an APM tool, we'll start to show them things that they store up and down isn't even possible. Like we'll find dev systems that are pointing to production databases or services that are calling each other that they swear in their documentation that doesn't, if they even have documentation, let's be honest. We also use it as a key building block in that enterprise application stack to monitor their applications on-prem, in the cloud, and sometimes even hybrid and multi-cloud. Eventually, we start to use AppD as a key component to getting us to self-healing architecture and our SRE teams. Just like digital transformation, monitoring is transforming as well. Marco touched on the SRE movement. I'm seeing similar results in my customer base. I'd say 25% have kind of figured out and already implemented SRE teams. Another 25% are kind of trying to figure it out. And the other 50% are still in like siloed monitoring teams where they're probably in the beginning of their digital transformation and digital experience journey, if you will. But real quick, let's talk about how we can build upon that DevOps MVP that I showed earlier. So a couple things real quick. Let's make sure we're not installing things by hand. We've been talking about automation. It's going to be a consistent theme. Customers that I see doing this never really get to the point of self-healing architecture. A lot of times their monitoring coverage peaks just after they first deploy it, and if they're lucky, they might achieve 50% coverage. Then over time, as people change, servers, services, platforms are spinning up, spinning down, being provisioned, being retired, people quit, whatever. The manual steps get lost in the noise of responding to issues, and monitoring starts to get left out. So we start to go back to no monitoring. So keeping in the theme of automation being key, if you remember back to our DevOps MVP that I showed earlier, I talked about how we've got Git as a change management tool and framework that we can use. I'm going to be describing things that are more container centric. Customers that I see spending time automating their monitoring tools consistently have a higher level of coverage across their environment. When you look at kind of like the core of what we're installing with AppDynamics, in most cases, it's some type of agent process and a config file. It should sound a lot like what you're deploying already with your CI/CD pipeline, no? So I've got even better news if you're using Kubernetes. AppDynamics has made it even easier. AppD has a Kubernetes operator that we can literally install into a cluster in 2 commands. You create a namespace and then you install the operator. Like that's all you got to do. It's really simple. So after we've invested a little bit of time into automating our monitoring solution, we get this consistent monitoring plane. This allows us to use monitoring for more than just like, oh no, bad things are happening. Well, let's run and check our monitoring tool. It allows us to monitor data proactively and make decisions about our deployment process because we have that monitoring data. So let's keep building upon our DevOps MVP. At this point, it's not really an MVP. It's starting to kind of take shape. and we're on our way to self-healing architecture. So if you're not familiar with the concept of quality gates, we just kind of tackled the problem of getting monitoring into our environment in a safe and repeatable way. We can now use the wealth of information that AppDynamics has in our environment to directly impact our release process. And you got to remember, we've got this goal of having industrial strength software that's safe and repeatable. This is the point where I feel like I should call out, you'll see the real benefit of why we wanted to separate CI and CD as two separate things. This is also the beginning of where you'll start to see the concepts of right-side testing that I was mentioning earlier before, where we're testing and validating quality by actually running our applications in the wild. So the concept of a quality gate is we use our APM software that is already out in our environment, watching, gathering, collecting. It knows what normal is, it knows what bad is. So we pick something that we want to measure. So I think the easiest metric to use to illustrate this concept is response time. It's something that's pretty easy to measure. Like Marco said, we all know when it's not good. Like we're clicking, we're banging, we start rage clicking. So let's take an example of, let's say our average response time of an application is 1 second. So if we want to define a quality gate, let's say we're willing to accept a 30% change. That means we will tolerate any release that has a response time of 30% or less. So basically, if I do a push, go through the process, start testing it, and my response time is somewhere between 1 and 1.3 seconds, we'll let that release happen and give it a thumbs up, and we'll promote it to the next stage. If that response time is outside, let's say I do that same build and I push it out and it's now 2 or 3 seconds, it's going to get a negative score, and we can roll that release back because it didn't pass our quality gate. And every build, every release, we're doing this constant validation. In lower environments, we can start filtering out this noise before it even gets to the higher end. Because we get out into production, we have AppDynamics already out there watching for us, so we know what normal is. So we'll do continuous validation even after we've released the software and it's what's the active version in prod. So building upon the central nervous system that Marco touched on, we've got AppDynamics sitting in the middle as the central nervous system. It's already got the correlation engine. It's got a bunch of APIs. It does alerting for us. It's got a lot of deep integration to other tools like, let's say, ServiceNow. We can also leverage this hub of information with another tool like Harness that specializes in CD. And if you're using Kubernetes, we've got Harness is kind of specializing in CD, but they've also started breaking down your cluster cost, and you can tie it back to cloud spend. So using Harness, we can really simplify our CD process to not be a bunch of custom scripts, and we can integrate it directly into AppD, because AppD, again, is the foundation to making this thing all possible. When we take Harness and AppDynamics and work together, it can help us solve one of the biggest challenges, right? Which is, how do I ensure I've got quality in every stage of my deployments? I'm continually monitoring production, but I'm also shipping fast, and I'm avoiding botched releases that directly impact my customers. With Harness, we can define what our release process is. It knows what normal is thanks to AppDynamics, but it does more than just integrating with our APM tools. We can pull in like system logs, app logs. We can start correlating that with what the APM is telling us what normal is and compare them. And we're doing this on every single release. So if we kick off a release, assuming everything passes our checks, we push it to the next stage. Then let's say we promote it to the dev environment, to a higher environment, and AppDynamics starts reporting an increased error rate or degraded response times. We can stop that release right there and go fix it. And this allows us to address and respond to customer impacting issues before they ever make it into production. There's also an assumption that I'm making here that we have monitoring in lower environments. There's kind of no longer a day where we can say we only need monitoring in production. You just can't do it anymore. You're not going to get to self-healing architecture. I mean, sure you could, but you're going to just keep introducing more and more problems, and you're going to be missing the point. If you really want to be able to preserve like your own sanity and the culture that you've worked so hard to build and focus around safe and repeatable releases, you need monitoring as the core to everything you do and treat it just as important as your software. And that gives us a foundation to kind of build this all out. So in summary, my key takeaways that I want you guys to learn from this is this stuff is hard, but it doesn't have to be. You know, there's people and tools to help. Without a solid foundation, in this case with monitoring, it's near impossible to react to the consumer demands of digital experience. And we also don't have to build this all in a day. That DevOps MVP that I'm talking about, we've done this in multiple phases with customers where some of our customers, they start out copy and paste deploys, and we slowly get them to CI/CD, and we start to help them develop this pipeline. And someday that we get them to, you know, fully autonomous automated rollbacks using APM data. But we don't have to start there on day one, because it's like drinking from a fire hose. So we'll hold your hand and help you out. And then just kind of the two philosophies that I use in every engagement is we want safe and repeatable releases, and we want engineers spending time on business value code, not tooling. So that's everything I've got for you, Marco. Anything you want to chime in and jump in there?
Probably too much. But what I'm going to do is just let's throw one last question out there. So before we get to the Q&A phase, I'm just going to throw one more poll question out there. And this is to understand who we've got listening to us. So we've got, you know, we've still got quite a number of people out there. So this question is about what would be your wish if you could, you know, wish one of these things, and I'm going to force you to pick one. What would be the one that you'd pick today? So I'm going to leave it up there for a moment or two while those answers come in, so you can swap to the screen and click on the answer for yourself. I know it's going to take a second to think about each one, of just to balance them out and work out your priorities. So we'll leave this one up for, you know, a little bit longer than the other polls. There was several things you were talking about in there, Justin, which I just thought was fantastic. You know, the aspect of, I love the concept of kids playing soccer. I thought that was a great visualization for it. And the separation of CI and CD being such, you know, that's a really critical thing for the success of some of these new approaches and new architectures. I'm just going to wait a moment more for the answers to come back on the poll.
While we're waiting, I do want to remind the audience, we do have a couple minutes for question and answer period. So if you have a question, go ahead and use the GoToWebinar control panel and submit it.
Yeah, and what I was saying is I'm still kind of shocked at the poll results to release anxiety. There's almost 80% of people were saying that release anxiety is a real thing for them.
I was surprised that, you know, I'm more the other way. I was surprised that there was like 15–20% people who said it wasn't. I mean, I still, you know, it's that huge difference of for me, it was always a gut feeling, the feeling in my gut just before I'm clicking to run the script that was going to trigger everything, or click on that button that's going to deploy into production, of just that moment of like, am I ready? And, you know, when I started my career a few decades ago, I was not ready. You know, I brought down when I used to live in Australia, I managed to bring down a national bank in Australia, the entire savings banks. Luckily, I did it, you know, in those days we would, you know, the Friday deployment thing you were mentioning earlier, of just like, we were deploying, you know, first thing on a Sunday morning, so that it never really hit the headlines. But, you know, ever since then, I've always had a backup plan. I've always had ways of recovering from some of these things. But God, I understand that feeling, man.
Do you remember doing deployments without source control, where somebody would copy and paste to a folder? They're like, oh, I'm good, I know what I'm doing. And then like rollback it's so much fun.
What rollback? You're really creating a new version.
Like,
you're just starting again from scratch. You're like, okay, we've got to rebuild it now.
Yeah, and then now it's an all-nighter, or that famous, like, I don't know how many times this has happened to other people, but let's just pick on SQL Server. Like, so we got SQL Server Management Studio. There's plugins now that you can like color them different, but you got two tabs open, one's production, one's development, and they do a drop table and they swear they're in development, and suddenly they just dropped a production table, and we're now getting pizza and sleeping bags because we're not going home.
So one of the things, I was in a conversation about SRE this morning, and we got talking about what is the personality type. So not the technology skills, but the personality type you're looking for it. And I sort of think, I watch people over the first couple of days of them doing training labs, and the person who, using iTerm 2, you know, the person who sets up a profile lab for a training lab you know, that they're remote connecting into straight away, so that they don't have to remember what the URL is or anything like that. They just create a profile, it's automated, they click on it, it connects and, you know, it secure shells into that machine straight away. That's sort of the personality type you want, somebody who immediately solves some, you know, some particular task by automating it. So let's pull the results out now. We've got a good number in there. And we're seeing a nice spread of people between the different sorts of wishes. I'm seeing a plurality here for automating sort of resource usage to matching load, and that brings home this whole thing that, you know, we have to accept automation. We know we can't do it with anything else. And then, of course, diagnosing code in production is an interesting one. I didn't mention on the way through, but, you know, with the AppDynamics tool, we have a thing called Deep Code Insight, which actually allows you to do that in production, that you can sort of jump into a production code running on production environment and sort of watch the variables go by. Of course, you know, we need GDPR protection and things like that, but so these are fascinating.
Yeah, but it's really cool when you get Deep Code Insights wired up to like a Git bucket. You can actually pull right into the line of code that's executing, and it'll take you into Git, for example, and you can go look at it, like where that error message is throwing or what that value was.
It's really cool, right? It's just very slick stuff, and very helpful. Anyway, I'll go back to the PowerPoint slides now, just for a quick wrap up. And so, you know, get your questions in there now. Basically, we have a couple in there already. So just bringing it all together, you know, emotionally, the side that, you know, in preparing yourself for this digital experience world, you need to understand that customers are judging you. You know, it doesn't sound nice, but it's the reality. And of course, we're all doing it. You need to accept that you need automation to survive, which is what the poll pretty much showed and then just a few seconds ago. Embrace your need for unified monitoring. You know, dtrace is great, but it's not, you know, it's not a survival mechanism in today's world. Realize that there are people and tools to help. You know, the reason we partner with fantastic companies like Observian is they just have such a broad, you know, people like Justin and the other people in his team, they have such a broad experience of different things. When I was running data centers, I generally bought through partners and worked with partners for two reasons. One, they had an awareness of you know, helping me negotiate with companies and bring in different pricing for me on software and technology. And then the second one is that they were walking into other people's environments all the time. Now, if I had the time, I would do that myself, but I don't. You know, I had a day job running the computer center. So that experience is a phenomenally powerful thing to bring into your environment so that people can just suggest, hey, why don't you try this? I saw it worked somewhere else. Reject release anxiety. You know, we shouldn't have that gut feeling when we click on something at the end of the day. And finally, probably the critical one, look, you can't, you know, in today's world, you can't define your value with tool experience. You've got to define it through business code. That is the reality that we live in today. So with that said, I'm going to say we have some resources here. I'm just going to leave that on the screen for a second or two, but let's go to a couple of the questions.
Well, we only have about 2 minutes to the top of the hour, so unfortunately we really don't have time for questions. But I will say that all of the questions that have come in, the folks at AppDynamics will be getting a copy of all the questions, so I'm sure that they will be more than happy to follow up with you offline. So I apologize for that, but do want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you miss any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. Following today's webinar, we are going to be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. The webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to DevOps.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there. Before we close things out, we did, at the top of the hour, I did mention that we were doing a drawing for 6 $25 Amazon gift cards. So let's go ahead and do that in the final minute here before we close things out. Our first winner today is Michael. Second winner to you. Congratulations, Michael. Third winner today is Wayne C. Congratulations, Wayne. Fourth winner is Andrew S. Congratulations, Andrew. Fifth winner is Emily R. Congratulations, Emily. And final winner today is Deepak B. Congratulations, Deepak. We'll be following up with all of you offline via email to get your gift card over to you, so please check your inbox. Marco and Justin, thank you very much for such a great presentation. Lots of great information in there, and love the fact that we've got some great resources here on the slide here for the audience. So thanks again, really do appreciate it. And also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe.